Can you hear me? I'd like to welcome you all to this evening's United Nations Pathways. We are delighted to have Ambassador Kumalo from South Africa, and this is going to be a wonderful event. I want to thank the Office of Global Learning. Well, I'm the Associate Provost for the Office of Global Learning. I'm Elise Salem. I'm jumping ahead of myself. And Malavika Kular, who with our student help, Andrea, helped put this together. And the Record News, thank you so much for co-sponsoring this event with us. And I will speak about Ambassador Kamal in just a couple of minutes. But what I wanted to say is that as a professor of literature for some 15 years, my expertise is in British literature, and I come from the Arab Middle East. And occasionally I can teach a course on Nobel literature, on literature from around the world. And what an eye-opening and delightful experience it has been for me in the past 10 years to teach the literature from South Africa, especially Nadine Gordimer and J.M. Coetzee, both winners of the Nobel Prize 1991 and 2003, and to enter into this very, very dynamic and turbulent and very changing space that is South Africa. From apartheid to Nelson Mandela to truth and reconciliation to the current challenges and upheavals that you are facing, South Africa provides a fascinating model for a nation state and a model for hope and a model for possibilities for those of us in the Arab Middle East and for those of us here trying to grapple with the global issues before us. I'd like to introduce Ambassador Kamal, a politician, a diplomat, a dear friend, and a professor who is the founder and the president of the Ambassadors Club at the United Nations, a diplomat for Pakistan and the United Nations for over some 40 years, an expert on disarmament, on technology, on so many things. He has hosted and been a leader at these events for 3 years now, and Ambassador Kamal will introduce the ambassador from South Africa. Thank you so much for all coming.
Thank you very much. It's my great pleasure and honor to present Ambassador Kumalo to this distinguished audience. There is a sort of a joke at the United Nations that somehow people whose names include the word Kamal have a particular importance in the UN. Kumalo, the Ambassador of India, Kamalesh, the Ambassador of Burundi, Kamaliel, the distinguished Ambassador of South Africa, Kumalo, and of course the father figure, the one and only original Kamal. I do not have to introduce Ambassador Kumalo to you because his CV is in front of you, and so all of you know that he's been here as the permanent representative to the United Nations for the past 7 years, which makes him a very senior ambassador in an organization where the turnover is fast and where ambassadors get worn out within 3 years, or they get found out within 3 years. And so people who last longer than that have some intrinsic mineral merit to them to be able to continue to be part of the United Nations mafia. But and you all know that Ambassador Kumalo has had a checkered domicile, out of which 20 years, he calls himself South African, but he probably knows the rest of the world better because he was in exile for 20 years out of South Africa. But I would like to, with his permission and with yours, introduce him, firstly, as the representative of South Africa. South Africa is an extraordinary country, which, in the words of Dickens, has seen the best of times and the worst of times, and has managed to pull itself by its bootstraps from the worst of times and one of the saddest periods on the history of the world into becoming a model country. And to have done so in the course of just one generation, to have done so peacefully, and to have done so with by gaining the respect of tolerance and of principles which are really very rare in the world of today. And so, as a son of South Africa, the question that we can ask Ambassador Kumalo is, what is it that enabled you to do something as extraordinary as what was done in South Africa? Was it a question of leadership? Because many of us look to the leadership of a very great South African as the core cause of this. Or was it that there is a special DNA in the blood of South Africa which makes them receptive to the idea of being able to use tolerance in the best possible manner? I would like to introduce him next as a representative from the United Nations. Ambassador Kumalo is the leader of the group of developing countries which constitute the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of the membership of the United Nations. Under his command are 134 member states of the United Nations out of 191. And so, Ambassador Kumalo, should he decide on taking any matter to the vote, can produce 134 votes and get anything through. And he does that with great dignity and with great respect, because over time we have seen that despite that great strength of the constituency that he has behind him, he has not misused that, and he is constantly working towards a consensus result with the other side, rather than pushing matters to a vote and trying to prove a point. And so, once again, is this part of a commitment to principles, or is it part of your DNA? And I'm sorry I keep talking about DNA, because I have learned recently that all our DNAs go back to East Africa, which makes all of us Africans in this room. And so we would like to share some of that DNA of yours in that. I'm honored to present you here today to this audience, which is deeply interested in South Africa. Some of us have our feet on the ground, and some of us have our feet in space. But whether our feet are on the ground or in space, we all have respect for you, for South Africa, and are looking forward to hearing from you about anything that you're going to tell us about yourself, your country, and the world. And for the audience, I'd just like to mention that Ambassador Kumalo has very graciously agreed to take questions at the end of his presentation. And since he speaks Afrikaans, Zulu, Sotho, Xhosa, Pedi, and Tswana, you are welcome to ask your questions in any of these 7 languages.
Thank you very, very much. And let me start by thanking Dr. Salem, the Associate Provost, and of course Ambassador Kamal. And he misspells his name. It's supposed to be Kumalo, but we won't get into that. And I must confess that I was very, very worried earlier on, because at 5 o'clock, we took a break in a very, very difficult negotiation in the UN, and they said, Mr. Chairman, you can't leave, and so I made them